making homemade soft pretzels from scratch. These things are so delicious and super easy to make. You're going to be surprised at how easy these are to make. So for this recipe, you're going to need some milk, 1 cup. You're also going to need 2 tablespoons of white sugar, 2 teaspoons of active dry yeast, 2 tablespoons of butter softened, half a teaspoon of salt, and 2 1/4 cups of all-purpose flour, plus more for kneading later on. Once you get the dough made up, you're also going to need 1 cup of water, 1 1/2 tablespoons of baking soda, some pretzel salt, which is just this coarse grind salt here. You can use any coarse or kosher salt you want to use, but pretzel salt is really cheap. You're also going to need 2 tablespoons of butter that has been melted with a pastry brush. First thing I'm going to do is, of course, make up my dough. I've got my milk here. I'm going to pour that into a large bowl. I've warmed that milk up to about 110 degrees. I'm going to sprinkle in my sugar, and right on top of that, sprinkle on my active dry yeast. You don't want your milk too hot for this because you will kill your yeast, but I'm just going to let this sit here for about 10 minutes until it gets a little bit foamy and let that yeast liven up a little bit. Once I've let that set, I'm going to go ahead and add in my salt, as well as my butter that has been softened here. Go ahead and get that in. Use your fingers if you have to, because you're going to get your fingers in here anyway. And I'm going to add in about half of my flour here. And just using a wooden spoon here, I'm going to mix this together until it comes together. Kind of forms this batter-like consistency. And I'm going to add in the remaining flour. And again, using your wooden spoon, just stir this in and mix it well until it kind of starts to come together. Now once that comes together, you want to go ahead and use your fingers and get the dough off your wooden spoon. Kind of scrape down the sides of your bowl and get everything off the bowl so you can get everything incorporated. And before I turn this out onto my bench to knead it, I'm going to knead it just a few times in the bowl and try and get as much as this flour and crumbs and stuff incorporated into the dough. Then you want to take a little bit more flour here and sprinkle that onto your counter or working surface, and take your dough and plop that out. And now you want to start kneading this. Now you're only going to knead this for maybe 1 or 2 minutes. You don't want to overwork it. You've already kneaded it for a few minutes in the bowl anyway. You just want to make sure that everything gets combined in that dough. It doesn't have to be a super smooth dough. A little lumpy is perfectly fine. But you just want to knead this to develop a little bit of the gluten and make sure that everything is mixed well. If your dough sticks to your counter a little bit, use a little bit more flour. While you're kneading this, you want to make sure and keep it moving because this is a wet dough. You don't want to add too much flour to it because then you're going to have stiff pretzels. If you keep the dough moving, it's not going to stick to either you or the counter. But definitely do not add a whole lot more flour to this because you don't want a stiff dough. Now once that comes together, you want to go ahead and remove it from your working surface and get yourself a large bowl that I've put just maybe a tablespoon of vegetable oil in there. And I'm going to swirl the dough around in that just to get it nice and coated. You want to make sure and cover it with a moist towel so it doesn't dry out. But go ahead and cover this, let it rise for 1 hour until it is doubled. Now while my dough is rising, I'm going to go ahead and make up my baking soda solution. I've got 1 cup of nearly boiling water. I'm going to pour that into a bowl, and I'm going to add in my baking soda. And using a whisk, I'm just going to whisk this together until that baking soda is dissolved. Now this is not really an optional step when you're making pretzels. This is what's going to give your pretzels that signature flavor as well as texture. You really want to do this. Don't worry, it's not going to harm you, it's not going to kill you, it's how pretzels are made. But once that gets mixed together, go ahead and set this off to the side until we knead it later. Now once your dough has doubled in size, you want to go ahead and take it out of your bowl and put it back onto your working surface. Don't worry about flouring your surface here, you're not going to need it. Your dough's really not going to stick, and you want a little bit of friction there on your working surface. But just go ahead and lay it out, and you want to cut your dough into 6 equal portions. Does not have to be exact, just eyeball it, and we're only going to be working with 1 of these pieces at a time. So go ahead and remove your other 5 pieces off to the side. And then to actually form our pretzels, you want to take 1 piece of your dough here, and using your fingertips here only, roll this out into about a 30-inch log. You don't have to get out a ruler and measure it. Just approximate. Make sure that it's evenly and consistently the same diameter from one end all the way to the other, and make like a horseshoe shape so the 2 ends are pointing towards you. And you want to take those 2 ends and put one over the other, and then cross it over again. And then you want to take your 2 ends and fold it up and pinch those onto the end, and that is your classic pretzel shape. I know the professionals, they pick it up and they swing it around, and you can play around with that. It takes a little bit of talent to do it. And now what you want to do is take your pretzel and you want to gently lay it down into your baking soda solution. Make sure that it is totally submerged in that solution, and you want to leave it in there for just maybe 5 or 10 seconds is all you need. And then you want to carefully lift that out and place it onto a cookie sheet that either has a silicone baking mat on it, or you want to heavily grease your pan because this will stick. And you only want to do a couple pretzels here at a time, because while they are still wet, you want to go ahead and take your pretzel salt and sprinkle that salt on top. Like I said before, you don't need pretzel salt for this. Pretzel salt is really cheap, but you can use kosher salt. Just use a coarse grind salt. If you've got a salt grinder, go ahead and use that. And this is to taste. You can put as much salt or as little salt as you want on this. And then you want to bake these in a preheated 450-degree oven. I know that sounds hot, but 450-degree Fahrenheit oven, and bake these for 9 to 10 minutes until they are nicely golden brown. And once they're nicely golden brown, you can go ahead and take them out and take your melted butter and your pastry brush here. And you want to brush these with that melted butter, and that's going to make sure that the pretzels are nice and soft. If you want a harder pretzel, go ahead and skip the butter part, but really a little better with the melted butter on it. So there you go. That is how you make homemade soft pretzels from scratch. Go ahead and serve these up with either cheese sauce, which I absolutely love, or some mustard, whatever you like, or leave them plain. Go ahead and give this recipe a try. It's really not complicated at all. So I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did,